The idea of pardoning all nonviolent prisoners in the United States is a profound and provocative scenario, one that raises complex questions about justice, public safety, economics, politics, and social change. It's a move that could reshape the American criminal justice system, impact millions of lives, and spark debates nationwide. What if the President of the United States issued a sweeping pardon to all nonviolent offenders currently incarcerated? What would be the consequences, immediate, long-term, and ripple effects across society? In this comprehensive analysis, we explore the vast implications of such a historic pardon. First, it's important to understand the context and scale of incarceration in the United States. The U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world, with over 2 million people behind bars in federal, state, and local facilities. A significant portion of this population consists of individuals convicted of nonviolent offenses. These include drug possession and low-level drug trafficking, property crimes such as theft or fraud without violence, white-collar crimes, certain regulatory offenses, and probation or parole violations. The exact number fluctuates, but estimates suggest that nearly half of all prisoners fall into the nonviolent category. If the president pardoned all these nonviolent prisoners, the immediate effect would be a massive release of incarcerated individuals. This would significantly reduce the prison population, alleviating overcrowding in many facilities that are currently operating beyond capacity. The logistical challenge of releasing hundreds of thousands of people at once would be enormous, requiring careful coordination among correctional institutions, parole boards, social services, and law enforcement agencies. Many questions arise. Where would these individuals go? What support systems would be in place to ensure their successful reintegration? How would the government handle potential resistance from local communities or political groups opposed to such a pardon? One of the most profound impacts of this pardon would be on the justice system itself. For decades, critics have decried the U.S. criminal justice system for its harsh sentencing policies, especially for drug offenses, which disproportionately affect minority communities. A mass pardon of nonviolent offenders would be a landmark step towards addressing systemic inequities and the legacy of mass incarceration. It could signal a shift from punitive approaches to rehabilitation and restorative justice, emphasizing healing over punishment. However, it might also provoke backlash from those who fear that releasing so many offenders could lead to increased crime or undermine the deterrent effect of the law. The economic implications of pardoning all nonviolent prisoners would be multifaceted. On one hand, the immediate savings in prison operating costs could be substantial. States and the federal government spend billions annually on incarceration, including housing, feeding, and providing health care to inmates. Reducing the prison population would lower these expenses and free up funds for other public needs, such as education, healthcare, or community programs. On the other hand, the government would need to invest heavily in re-entry programs to support returning citizens, including job training, housing assistance, mental health services, and addiction treatment. Without robust support, many released individuals risk recidivism or falling into homelessness and poverty. Employment and workforce dynamics would also shift dramatically. Many nonviolent prisoners have lost years of potential work experience and face significant barriers to employment upon release, including stigma, lack of skills, and legal restrictions. A mass pardon would create a sudden influx of job seekers needing opportunities and training. This could strain social services but also create new markets for workforce development and education. Employers might benefit from a larger labor pool, but might also resist hiring formerly incarcerated individuals without incentives or legal protections. Policy changes encouraging fair hiring practices and anti-discrimination measures would be essential to maximize positive outcomes. From a social perspective, the pardon could help mend fractured families and communities. Incarceration often tears families apart, disrupting relationships, financial stability, and emotional well-being. Many nonviolent prisoners are parents, and their absence has ripple effects on children's development, education, and future prospects. Reuniting families could strengthen social cohesion, reduce child poverty, and promote healthier communities. However, the reintegration process would not be without challenges, including overcoming stigma and rebuilding trust. Support networks such as counseling, mentoring, and community engagement programs would play a vital role. Politically, such a bold pardon would be a polarizing move. Advocates for criminal justice reform would likely hail it as a transformative step towards fairness and decarceration. It could energize movements advocating for broader reforms, such as sentencing reform, police accountability, and racial justice. Conversely, critics might accuse the president of being soft on crime or jeopardizing public safety. Opposition could come from political rivals, law enforcement unions, and some segments of the public. The media would play a significant role in shaping the narrative, influencing public opinion through framing the pardon as either courageous reform or reckless policy. The impact on crime rates would be one of the most scrutinized aspects of the pardon. Empirical evidence on the relationship between incarceration rates and crime is complex. Some studies suggest that incarceration has diminishing returns on crime reduction, especially for non-violent offenders who often pose less risk to public safety than violent criminals. Releasing non-violent prisoners could reduce prison violence and allow resources to focus on high-risk offenders. However, critics fear a spike in crime, especially property or drug-related offenses. The outcome would largely depend on the availability of support services and effective community policing. Mental health and substance abuse issues are prevalent among incarcerated populations, particularly non-violent offenders. A mass pardon would thrust many individuals with untreated or undertreated conditions back into society. This underscores the urgent need for expanded access to mental health care and addiction treatment. Without these supports, the risk of relapse, homelessness, or involvement with the criminal justice system could increase. Innovative partnerships between health providers, social services, and criminal justice agencies would be crucial to address these challenges holistically. Education would also be a critical factor in the success of this pardon. Many incarcerated individuals have limited educational attainment due to disrupted schooling or socioeconomic disadvantages. The pardon could create demand for adult education, vocational training, and higher education programs targeted at returning citizens. Increasing access to education could improve employment prospects, reduce recidivism, and foster social mobility. However, funding and capacity constraints might limit the availability of these programs, requiring policy prioritization and investment. Technology and data analytics could support the implementation of such a pardon. Predictive models might help identify individuals at higher risk of recidivism, guiding the allocation of support resources. Digital platforms could facilitate communication between parole officers, social workers, and returning citizens, improving coordination and outcomes. Technology could also assist in monitoring compliance with parole or rehabilitation programs without overly invasive surveillance. Privacy and ethical considerations would need to be carefully managed. The pardon's effect on the legal profession would be noteworthy. Public defenders, prosecutors, and judges might see changes in their caseloads and priorities. The court system could experience reduced pressure from fewer cases related to non-violent offenses. This might free up resources to address violent crimes or systemic issues like wrongful convictions. However, the legal community would also need to adapt to new challenges related to record expungement, reentry rights, and civil legal aid for returning citizens. Religious and community organizations would likely play a vital role in the post-pardon landscape. Many such groups provide mentoring, housing assistance, job placement, and counseling to formerly incarcerated individuals. Their involvement could bridge gaps between government programs and individual needs, fostering a more compassionate and effective reintegration process. The pardon might also inspire renewed dialogue on forgiveness, redemption, and social justice within faith communities. Media and popular culture could experience shifts in narratives about crime and punishment. Stories highlighting the humanity of formerly incarcerated individuals might gain prominence, challenging stereotypes and reducing stigma. Documentaries, films, and books could explore themes of second chances and systemic reform. Conversely, sensationalist media coverage might focus on isolated incidents to fuel fear or opposition. The cultural conversation would be dynamic and influential in shaping public attitudes. Internationally, the U.S. pardon could influence criminal justice policies abroad. As a global leader, the U.S. often sets examples in law enforcement and penal practices. A bold move towards decarceration and rehabilitation could inspire similar reforms in other countries, particularly those grappling with mass incarceration or human rights concerns. Conversely, it might be viewed with skepticism in nations with tougher crime policies. International human rights organizations might applaud the pardon as a step toward humane justice. The political capital gained or lost by the president through such a pardon would be significant. If managed successfully, it could cement a legacy as a transformative leader advancing social justice. However, if perceived as reckless or poorly executed, it could damage credibility and influence. The timing of the pardon, the communication strategy, and the accompanying policy measures would be critical to public acceptance. The president would need to balance bold reform with pragmatic governance. The pardon might also spur legislative action. Congress could be motivated to pass complementary reforms, such as sentencing revisions, expanded rehabilitation funding, or changes to parole systems. Conversely, some legislators might push back, proposing tougher laws or restrictions on presidential pardons. The interplay between executive and legislative branches would shape the long-term trajectory of criminal justice reform. Families of victims might experience complex emotions and reactions. Some might feel that justice is being undermined or that the pardon disregards their suffering. Others might support rehabilitative approaches that reduce incarceration without compromising accountability. Facilitating dialogue between victim advocacy groups and reform proponents would be essential to foster understanding and healing. Technology companies and entrepreneurs might find opportunities in this new landscape. Developing apps, platforms, and services tailored to reentry needs, such as job matching, legal aid, or social support networks, could become a growing market. Innovations in telehealth, virtual mentoring, and remote education could enhance access and effectiveness for formerly incarcerated individuals. Public-private partnerships could accelerate progress. The pardon could lead to shifts in urban and rural demographics. As large numbers of people are released, housing demand might increase in certain areas, potentially exacerbating existing shortages or creating new ones. Urban centers might see growth in communities of returning citizens, while rural areas might experience changes in workforce composition. Housing policy and development strategies would need to account for these dynamics to prevent homelessness and promote stable living environments. Healthcare systems might also be affected. Many incarcerated individuals have untreated chronic conditions. Their release could increase demand for community health clinics, emergency care, and ongoing medical treatment. Integrating formerly incarcerated individuals into health systems would require training for providers on trauma-informed care and culturally competent practices. Public health planning would be crucial to accommodate changing needs. The pardon would likely stimulate academic research and policy analysis. Scholars across criminology, sociology, economics, and public health would study its effects, producing data-driven insights to guide future reforms. Universities and think tanks might establish dedicated centers for reentry and decarceration research, fostering collaboration and innovation. This knowledge base could inform better policies and practices globally. Philanthropy and nonprofit sectors would play an essential role. Foundations might increase funding for reentry programs, legal services, education, and advocacy. Nonprofits would expand direct service delivery, community organizing, and policy advocacy. Collaboration across sectors could enhance impact and sustainability. The pardon could catalyze a broader movement for justice and equity. Environmental impacts might be surprisingly positive. Reducing incarceration lowers the carbon footprint associated with prison facilities, which consume substantial energy and resources. Redirecting funds to community-based programs might support sustainable development and green jobs, especially if tied to workforce initiatives for returning citizens. Environmental justice concerns could intersect with criminal justice reform in innovative ways. The pardon might also influence gun policy and public safety initiatives. Some nonviolent offenders might have prior gun convictions or restrictions. Navigating legal complexities around firearms ownership and rights would require careful policy crafting to balance public safety and reintegration goals. Community-based violence prevention programs could complement these efforts. Religious and spiritual leaders might emerge as advocates for reconciliation and healing. Emphasizing forgiveness and redemption, they could foster community support and reduce stigma. Interfaith coalitions might organize initiatives to welcome returning citizens, provide mentorship, and address moral dimensions of justice. This spiritual dimension could deepen social cohesion. The pardon could also impact prison staff and correctional officers. Reduced prison populations might lead to layoffs or reassignments, affecting livelihoods and morale. Supporting these workers through retraining, counseling, and alternative employment programs would be vital. Transitioning from incarceration to rehabilitation models requires attention to all stakeholders. Education systems, particularly community colleges and vocational schools, might see increased enrollment as returning citizens seek skills and credentials. Programs tailored to this population's unique needs could flourish, supported by government and philanthropic funding. Expanding access to education aligns with broader goals of reducing recidivism and promoting economic mobility. Media literacy and public education campaigns would be crucial. Informing the public about the reasons for the pardon, its goals, and expected outcomes can build trust and reduce fear. Countering misinformation and sensationalism would support a more informed and constructive discourse. Engaging diverse voices, including formerly incarcerated individuals, families, and experts, can enrich the conversation. The pardon might also catalyze innovation in restorative justice practices. These approaches focus on repairing harm and involving victims, offenders, and communities in healing. Scaling restorative programs could reduce reliance on incarceration and foster healthier social dynamics. Integrating these models into mainstream criminal justice systems would require training, funding, and cultural shifts. Technological advances in monitoring and support could evolve. Electronic monitoring, while controversial, might be refined to better balance supervision and privacy. Apps for medication reminders, appointment scheduling, and peer support could enhance adherence to reentry plans. Data security and ethical concerns would need ongoing attention. In terms of family dynamics, the pardon could lead to reunification, but also require support for complex emotional and practical challenges. Counseling, parenting classes, and family therapy might help rebuild trust and communication. Addressing trauma and intergenerational effects of incarceration would be vital for long-term success. Economically, new industries might emerge focused on serving returning citizens. These could include housing development, social services, education, and employment sectors. Entrepreneurship among formerly incarcerated individuals might rise, supported by microloans and business training. Economic empowerment would be a key to breaking cycles of incarceration and poverty. The pardon could also impact public transportation and infrastructure. Increased mobility needs might prompt investment in accessible transit options, supporting employment and social engagement. Coordinating transportation services with reentry programs could improve outcomes. The arts and cultural sectors might flourish with new voices and stories from formerly incarcerated individuals. Theater, music, visual arts, and literature could provide powerful platforms for expression, healing, and advocacy. Supporting arts programs as part of reentry initiatives could foster community engagement and personal growth. Religious holidays and cultural celebrations might take on new meaning with the reintegration of formerly incarcerated family members. Communities could develop inclusive traditions that honor resilience and second chances. These cultural shifts would enrich social fabric and promote understanding. The pardon might also spark innovations in housing policy, including supportive housing models, cooperative living arrangements, and affordable housing developments tailored to reentry populations. Collaborations between government, nonprofits, and developers would be critical to address housing needs effectively. Internationally, the pardon could lead to collaborations on criminal justice reform and human rights. Sharing best practices, research, and innovations might accelerate progress globally. The U.S. could serve as a model or cautionary tale depending on outcomes, influencing policy debates worldwide. Data transparency and accountability would be essential. Publishing detailed reports on the pardon's effects, including successes and challenges, would build public trust and inform continuous improvement. Independent oversight bodies might monitor implementation and recommend adjustments. In conclusion, the mass pardon of all nonviolent prisoners by the U.S. president would be a transformative event with profound implications across every facet of society. It offers opportunities to repair injustices, promote health and economic well-being, and rethink the very nature of justice. Yet, it also presents enormous challenges in logistics, public safety, political will, and social cohesion. The success of such a bold initiative would hinge on comprehensive planning, robust support systems, community engagement, and a commitment to equity and human dignity. The conversation around mass pardons is not just about releasing prisoners. It's about envisioning a more just, compassionate, and sustainable society. It forces us to ask difficult questions about punishment, redemption, and the kind of future we want to build together. Whether or not such a pardon occurs, the dialogue it sparks can inspire meaningful reforms and renewed hope for millions.